Okay, so since it's 1 p.m., we'll go ahead and get started. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this week's installment of the Huron Pines Connecting to Nature series. We're really excited to spend the next 30 minutes learning with you. Here at Huron Pines, we work to conserve and enhance Northern Michigan's natural resources. We're focused in 3 primary program areas: healthy water, protected places, and vibrant communities, where our staff implement projects from river restoration and green infrastructure to protecting special places forever, as well as controlling invasive species populations. If you're not familiar with our work, we encourage you to get to know us. I'm Jen Klemm, a Huron Pines AmeriCorps member serving at Huron Pines as part of my VISTA service through Michigan Tech, where I'm pursuing my master's in applied ecology. Heather Huffstutler of Huron Pines will be leading a great conversation today, and before we slide into that, I have just a couple of housekeeping items. Please feel free to make use of the chat box to respond to questions, which you'll see bolded on the slides, or to ask questions of your own today. We'll also have time set aside at the end for a full Q&A. If you do experience any technical difficulties, Chris Engel, our communications associate, is available in the chat by email or by phone. We'll also be recording this installment, so if you lose connection, you can watch it later. And finally, I want to acknowledge the incredible funders who support the Huron Pines education program: the Great Lakes Fishery Trust, Consumers Energy Foundation, the U.S. Forest Service, the Michigan Department of Natural Resources, the U.S. Endowment for Forestry and Communities through the Healthy Watersheds Consortium program, as well as individual donors and supporters like you. And with that, I'm going to let Heather introduce herself, and then we'll slide into this week's topic.
Thanks, Jen. I'm excited to be here today. So I'm Heather Huffstutler. I'm the Land Protection Director at Huron Pines, which means that I get to explore some great wild places for work and help to get them protected, in a nutshell.
That's awesome. So today we're going to be talking about protecting those wild places. And so what are some things that we should know about the formation of these wild areas?
Yeah, lots of things. So what we first want to think about are kind of how these wild places came to be, and what it is that's formed these places. So we think about, glacial history, which we'll talk a bit about today, water, climate and precipitation, and topography. Okay, so awesome. We want to, sorry.
No, go ahead.
So I was gonna say, so I find it nice to sort of start off by, thinking about a place that you all like and love, that is a wild place or a place in nature that brings you some peace. What kind of base features might be making it lovely today?
Yeah, and that's an awesome question to start off with, Heather. I know anywhere with water, I appreciate. So small lakes around, rivers, the big lakes, right?
Yep, absolutely. So when my family first moved to Michigan, we settled in Lake Michigan coastal towns. So it would stand to reason that I also fell in love with the Great Lakes and small inland lakes, but also those dune systems and the back dune forest, the beech maple forest, and the back dunes. There's so many great places in Michigan, though, and that's kind of why it's really exciting to be doing what I do now and kind of protect the best of the best. And it's nice to hear about yours. So put those in the chat and stuff, and those of us that haven't been there maybe can visit too. So all these wild places in Michigan were at one time what we sort of call glaciated. So they were covered by big sheet of ice glacier. The most recent was the Wisconsin Glacier about 14,000 years ago. And as it retreated, it left a lot of these features on the land that we now can see on the landscape behind. So, so this slide, this image on your right shows the outwash plain, terminal moraines, and kettles. So as the glacier is receding, it's scouring and scraping, and then it's also kind of turning and churning and leaving sand and silt and sediment and rocks behind. So in those moraines is where we'll see some more hilly landscapes, sand dunes as well. And then we'll see kettle lakes and stuff happen where the glacier maybe scoured more And kettle lakes are cool. They were formed by big chunks of ice getting left behind and then covered by some of that sediment. And then that ice melted, and then we have a lake. And there, some kettle lakes are some of my favorite inland lakes. And then this map of Michigan is sort of divided into georegions. So you can see, you have the northern upland region, you have the Sheboygan lowlands, and the Saginaw lowlands as well, which is what we're kind of talking about today.
Awesome. And so in the chat, we're seeing a lot of people like Tawas Point State Park, the Lake Superior shorelines, and the Pigeon River country. And so as we're looking at all of these areas and going to all these natural places, how do we know that a glacier has been there? What are some actual examples of that?
Yeah, so we see these glacial features in natural communities or habitat types or ecosystems that a lot of you might find familiar. So for example, we start with the coastal fen or other coastal wetlands. Those were formed by glacial till being left behind in these openings, and those openings are greatly influenced and connected to Great Lakes water levels. So the limestone bedrock is really close to the surface, so almost no soil develops. And the soil that does develop is really calcareous, which means full of calcium because of that limestone bedrock. So there are some special plants that thrive here, like fringed gentian and lady slipper and pitcher plant, which is one of my favorites to see. I think it's here in the foreground of this picture, which is one of Michigan's carnivorous plants. And then we can also see glacial activity in sand dunes. Sand dunes were formed, at least our Great Lakes sand dunes, were formed in sort of conjunction with or at the same time as glacial Lake Algonquin, those high lake levels. Lake Algonquin was kind of the first lake before we had all five. And so as Lake Algonquin receded, and the glacier receded, we have lots of movement of sediment and sand and wave action. And then the wind off the coast then pushes all that sand and sediment into our dunes. And again, really special plants evolved to thrive on the dune systems as well, like pitcher's thistle, a federally endangered plant that the seeds have to be covered and then uncovered before it'll germinate. It's a very complicated system, but really cool. So there are some plants and stuff that we'll see on these systems. And then we also see signs of glaciers in wooded landscapes. The dry northern forests, for example, people might find familiar, red pine forests or jack pine forests. These occur on sandy glacial outwashes. So when we saw the diagram of the retreating glacier, that outwash plain, sort of that first big part of scouring and depositing of sand. These types of forests support lots of rare and special species like Allegheny plum, which is a really pretty shrub. The northern goshawk, one of our excellent raptors in northern Michigan, Kirtland's warbler, of course. And just because it's fun to say, pussy toes is a fun little flowering plant that loves these sandy soils. And then another one that I can't forget about, hardwood conifer swamps. We often kind of, give swamps the brush off, but these are cool places that occur in these outwash plains and in depressions that were left by glacial retreat. And we see our beloved hemlock forests, our cedars living together with lots of different ferns. So that's what you see here. It's also a lot of these forests, as they evolve, they're continue to be formed by wind throw, which in this picture, that's what you can see, that big the big root ball sitting up here. So that opens up some canopy, opens up some light, and lets some different things grow too. So lots of good things happening in hardwood conifer swamps. These are also great habitat for special species like golden seal and Michigan monkey flower, another really fun one.
Awesome. And so we know what those communities are, and we've been on them a lot. But so, what are some of these recreation activities that we have because of these natural communities?
Yeah, so for example, when we mountain bike, we're likely riding along moraines or other deposits of glacial till that create these gently rolling woodlands that we really like to mountain bike in and that we really like to hike in too. And then when we kite surf, does anybody kite surf? I would love to know if you do. Um, we're riding on the same winds that helped form those dunes, and they form the sandbars that make the surf so interesting in the Great Lakes for kite surfing.
Yeah, I know with kite surfing, I'm pretty sure one of my brothers tried it, or at least wanted to try it. So,
Yeah, I
um,
took lessons ages ago. It was hard, but it always looks so pretty.
yeah, and so graceful. But yeah, so as we're recreating on these areas, is it mutually exclusive that we can also be protecting and preserving them? Like, is it one or the other, or?
It's not one or the other. The thing that is, I think, really great about, we've exploring these natural communities and ecosystems, but we want to protect them because they have all these great plants and animals and are unique to our region. But we also want to be able to experience them and know them, and see them, right? So so part of protection is encouraging folks to use these places, sort of as much as they can support, right? So I've been involved in lots of land protection projects in which we ensure that we're protecting the right kind of land for habitat or for special species, but we're also building in opportunities for people to see them. So for example, building sustainable mountain biking trails in those hilly woodlands, and then, preserving a farm with headwater streams. So headwater streams are really important to water quality protection. But when we preserve that farm, we want to ensure that we continue to have a community gathering space, for example, or a place for educational events.
Awesome. So, if you guys want to chat in, what are some of the things that you look for in a recreation spot? Do you look for it to be pretty heavily managed? Do you look for a little bit more natural of an area, places where other people are? Um, I know I like well-traveled trails, just to stick on them. Um, but we're seeing more natural, fewer people, which is always nice, especially right now, right?
Right, less people. Yeah. Yeah, so that's one of the things that we're thinking a lot about. And I have seen, managers of trails create trail loops that are one way these days. So, you won't be running into another person coming the opposite way, which is, I think, a great thing to think about. And then we also just need to be cognizant of looking at parking lots and having backup plans if things look too full for us right now.
Yeah, and so a lot of those natural features and not as human touched. But so why are we protecting what we are protecting at the end of the day? Like it's nature, right? Especially if we're not touching it.
Yeah.
Why do we need to be protecting it?
Yeah, so if it's nature and we get out and we enjoy it, we also want to understand, like we started out thinking about, sort of what is it that's formed it. Um, so one of the things that the thing that creates sort of the diversity and the stuff that we love about our wild places today is exactly that glacial landform. And really smart people, luckily our partners, have started to think about those glacial landforms as kind of nature's stage, if you will. So the glaciers that form the stage, the bedrock, the landforms, are the things that support the diversity that we want to protect in the first place. And that diversity is the players on the stage. So the plants and the animals and the insects. And so what we want to try to do is understand that stage so that we can protect the best that Northeast Michigan has, so we can always see it, feel it, and know it. So I kind of want to let you all in on this idea that Huron Pines has a really unique opportunity that I'm really excited to be a part of, and that is to create special places that are protected. We're protecting the best natural communities and habitat types that we've talked about for rare species, but we're also creating space for us in those places. So we've sort of deliberately set our priorities to align with part of our strategic vision, that is that conservation in Northeast Michigan is led by empowered communities. So what does that kind of mean? That's sort of organizational development speak, right? What we'll do is we'll certainly work to understand where those stages are. What are those really important formations that inform our natural communities that are unique to Northeast Michigan? But we'll also participate in creating plans with our community and visit places that you know and love and participate with you in events. So, we take part in a lot of invasive species control, and that lends itself well to understanding community parks and open spaces and where we might be able to assist with protection of those, as well as really spectacular untouched places that people visit once a year and have a real strong connection to. So, we'll use our skills to work alongside agencies and communities, but we also want to know what you all think is important. And that is what is going to help us be successful in continuing to protect these wild places.
Awesome. So kind of as we're summarizing all of these points and all of this great information and kind of the land protection secrets, right? How do we apply all this in our daily life? I think most of us can't go and be land managers or actually do active invasive species removal. So how can we be applying it in our lives?
Yeah, I think that a lot of it is about observation and appreciation. So I think, we can observe the places that we visit and look for unique things, look for unique features. So last year I got to visit a brand new place. I visited the Emily Min Hunt Preserve, which is Huron Pines' newer preserve in Presque Isle County. And you notice almost immediately that there's a ton of bedrock visible right at the surface, sticking out of the surface, in fact. And so, then you can begin to think about what differences does that create in the plants that you expected to see versus the plants that you are seeing, and maybe where are those transitions. And that brings us into a stronger appreciation. And when we appreciate something in a deeper way, then we can maybe begin to support these places in different ways. So maybe, join a work day to help keep those trails intact that you just discovered and have really enjoyed. Or you become so connected to certain places or certain regions that you actually, decide to donate to a campaign to get more stuff protected.
Awesome. So what natural communities are you guys all finding yourselves drawn to? And do you know who the organizations that are working to protect those are? Are you familiar with them at all? Are they just kind of foreign to you? And Sharon has a great tip in the chat too about how we can naturalize our properties by planting natives and not using too many pesticides and reducing or eliminating our mowing to have more habitat. So
yeah, increasing backyard habitat is a direct way to increase what we call, sort of in conservation speak, increasing that connectivity. So, we want to make travel for insects and animals and plants as well, native plants especially. We want to make travel kind of easy on them, right? And so we want to create the right kind of spaces that they can sort of jump around and have more habitat and room to thrive.
And we're also seeing Michelle in the chat saying that they love bogs. I also love bogs, and that's pitcher plants. There is an awesome floating bog that I went to in the UP last year, and that was so crazy.
Those are so really, really special places. I will say it was really hard to choose just 4 natural communities to show everybody today. There are way too many that are super cool. But as we're thinking about places that we're drawn to, and you know, increasing our appreciation of those places and our deeper understanding, I also think it's great. You know, I kind of want to challenge people too to visit a place that has a habitat type or a natural community type that you've never been to. So, you know, think about maybe the place that you drive by and just haven't visited yet. Or, you know, like I said, we kind of give the brush off to those hardwood swamps or something. So maybe there's a preserve around with a great boardwalk through a hardwood swamp. I can actually point you in the right direction if that's your thing. But we can go through those observation and those appreciation steps, and maybe if we're lucky, we'll get you to those support steps too. And then also, like we mentioned earlier, kind of take note of who it is that's protected that place. You know, is it a state park? Is it your township park? Is it a conservation organization? And even just reaching out and letting people know that you appreciate the work that they've done to keep that protected is really, really great. I know whenever we get quick emails from folks who visited one of our preserves in the last week or so, and they, you know, just say thanks, it helps a lot to keep things moving. But don't go too far to visit someplace new.
Yeah. And Michelle, that specifically the floating bog that I went to wasn't at Wetmore, but I have been to Wetmore and I love it out there. But yeah, I think that's great. I know personally I haven't been to as many sand dunes. Like I've been to Sleeping Bear Dunes, but I wasn't looking at it through a geography lens, right? And so that would be a great way to re-experience some places if you've already been there too.
Yeah, I think it's really fun to think a little bit more deeply and take what is maybe an awe-inspiring place, and you can sort of break it down a little bit more and really digest where you are.
Awesome. And then did you have a picture of?
Yeah, there it is. Sorry. So so this is a limestone bedrock glade, which is what we have at the Emily Min Hunt Preserve. I will admit that it is not in as good a shape as this. This is, I believe, Maxton Plains, which is the Nature Conservancy Preserve. But this is, you know, this is where we have those exposed limestone really close to the Great Lakes shoreline, floods seasonally. So plant growth is slow and stunted and just kind of strange. It's almost like being on a mountaintop, but you're at sea level. But you'll see plants that are similar to prairies, like wild strawberry and black-eyed Susan and Indian paintbrush, and of course the juniper and the cedar. So it's just a really neat place that unless you're sort of, you know, from Northeast Michigan, you might not normally see.
That's awesome. Okay, so I think that was all a great activity, and I'm excited to go see the Emily Min Hunt Preserve too. And if you guys are all looking for other ways to get outside, be sure to check out our Stay Connected to Nature page at huronpines.org. But for now, that wraps up today's content and the whole series, really. And so we appreciate everyone for joining us. And I have a few wrap-up items, and then we'll have time for questions. So as a part of our efforts to understand how we can continue to improve education programming, we'd appreciate a couple minutes of your time to fill out an evaluation survey at the conclusion of this. Chris has put the link in the chat box. We have take-home notes which highlight the primary information covered today, as well as some additional resources and links, which will be sent to everyone who pre-registered with Chris. If you didn't pre-register, feel free to email Chris at huronpines.org, and he'll get you all that information. And I just want to say thank you to everyone for tuning in and watching our Connecting to Nature series. Every segment has been available on the Huron Pines YouTube channel in case you missed any or would like to catch up on any of the content. Okay, so with that, let's go ahead and dive into any questions that you guys have. So Jan's asking in the chat, what restrictions are involved in going to see Kirtland warblers, if you know?
So we have information that we can send to Jan, but I can say off the top of my head, I know that most or all of the like organized viewing tours have been canceled this season. You still can go and do the self-guided tour, and there's a map of that self-guided tour that we can send to her if that works for you, Jan. The restrictions are, we don't try to touch the birds and that sort of thing, and take pictures and leave only footprints and those sorts of things. But I'm going to try to do the self-guided tour as well, because I haven't been out to look for them in several years.
Yeah, and another thing to keep in mind too is that Kirtland warblers are ground nesting. So if you are walking around and hunting around, just be really, really careful not to step too close to any of their nests or step on their nests. Yeah, and yeah, so if anyone has any questions, I know how long of a process is it usually, Heather, when making kind of protecting these areas from sort of project inception to actual implementation?
So a really common saying from people that do my kind of job is, it depends. We could get projects done in a year, or we're actually working on a project now that has been at least 5 years in the making, if not more. So it all depends on funding and landowner goals and finding the right tools, for protection. So we protect land in several different ways, and some of that is more simple, and some of it is pretty complicated.
Okay, that's fair.
I know that's not a great answer.
I mean, I'm sure it really depends on each project, right? And the motivation behind it and finances and stuff. And so kind of thinking back to how Huron Pines has the two preserves, right? Emily Min Hunt and then the Hubbard Lake Preserve. What are some special features that we might see out there besides the limestone bedrock?
Yeah, the glade and the sort of the abundance of signs of glacial formations at Min Hunt are kind of what make Min Hunt really interesting. We also at the Hubbard Lake Preserve, which is on the north side of the lake, that is a mostly red pine and red oak forest, and it's very hilly. So we have lots of glacial moraines and that sandy soil that we talked a lot about in that northern upland sort of georegion. At the Hubbard Lake Preserve is really easy for people to visit. We have a good trail loop, and it's just a nice sort of place for a walk in the woods.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Any mountain biking on either of those, or kite surfing?
Actually, well, I'm waiting on the coastal project to maybe have a kite surfing, stop spot or something. And actually, right now, mountain biking is not allowed on either one, just because we have such sandy soils at Hubbard Lake, and sensitive soils at Min Hunt. So, but I know there are lots of other places for good mountain biking and stuff. And there are some really good resources. There's an Up North Trails website and some other places for folks to look for that kind of recreational access.
Okay, awesome. Now we do have another minute or two for questions if anyone does have any questions, but we'll go ahead and share. We have some extra learning videos too if you guys are interested in more of the topic. And so, okay, so a really good question from Laura is, how are places like Lowe's allowed to sell invasive plants? I know in my landscaping career, we planted a lot of barberry. And so why are they still doing that? And things like wisteria and English ivy.
Right. So there's a difference between invasive and what we know as invasive plants, and the plants that we know are invasive or non-native, and the plants that are restricted. So each state creates a restricted plant list of noxious weeds that the sales of which are restricted. So things like English ivy, unfortunately, don't rise to the level of presenting as much economic impact as something like Japanese knotweed, for example. So, so that's kind of the short answer of why. I will also say that we, as a conservation community, kind of across the country, lots and lots of people have tried to tackle the nursery and landscape industry challenges with sale and installation of invasive and non-native species. And I'm sure our stewardship team lead, Shelby Bauer, can talk at length about how those go. But basically, I mean, we're working hard on outreach and working with partners and others to try to reach those folks and talk about the importance of limiting the sale and spread of even plants that might seem a little more or seem a little less damaging, but.
Okay, yeah. And I do just want to say that Heather and I can stay on the line for another 10 to 15 minutes to continue answering questions, but just to honor that 30-minute time slot, since it is 1:30, if you guys do need to jump off, we appreciate you joining us today. And then we do have those extra videos. And then if you haven't filled out the evaluation, go ahead and do that. And if you do want take-home notes that go through kind of the highlights of everything that Heather and I kind of chatted through today, as well as some of those vocab and some of those extra links, feel free to go ahead and email Chris at Huron Pines, and he can get you those take-home notes. But yeah, and thank you guys all for tuning in again. It's been a really great series, and I'm glad to have been able to chat with all of you at one point or another. But
well, thanks, Jen. You've done a great job of keeping us all moving through this and helping us learn more.
Yeah, well, if it wasn't for you guys presenting such great information, I love it. I feel like we don't talk about glaciers enough, especially living in Michigan. And so
when, yeah, you know, and thinking about how to talk about these wild places, I just kind of thought it was just an interesting tack to take because it's something that we don't think about a lot, but it's always there.
I mean, we wouldn't really have the Great Lakes without those, right? And
yeah,
failed rift zones and. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, awesome. Well, if there are no more questions coming in, we'll probably end it here. But I just want to say thank you guys all again for tuning in. And if you will have more content that you'd be interested in seeing, feel free to write us or fill out those evals. And there's a section for if there's anything else you'd like to see, if you want to learn more about invasives or anything for future programming. That'd be awesome. So
thanks, everybody.